It begins with a faint shimmer, not the bright blaze of a lamp nor the warm flicker of a candle, but a softer, stranger light, the quiet glow of something hidden inside the world, waiting centuries for someone patient enough to notice it. Long before hospitals hummed with machines and doctors spoke of radiation, as casually as sunlight, there was only mystery, minerals that seemed to pulse in the night, invisible forces slipping through flesh and bone, a universe full of secrets too small for the eye to see. Into this world, in a country struggling under occupation, a young girl named Marie Skłodowska was born, curious, restless, and drawn to knowledge with a hunger that felt almost dangerous. She did not yet know that she would spend her life chasing the unseen. She did not yet know that her discoveries would reshape medicine, save millions, and cost her more than she could ever replace. What she carried was something quieter, a mind sharpened by hardship, a spirit made resilient by loss, and a belief that truth, even when invisible, could illuminate the darkest corners of the world. Tonight, we follow her journey from the dim classrooms of secret Polish schools to the glowing lab in Paris, where she uncovered forces that would forever change how humanity understands the body, illness, and healing. A journey lit not by fortune or fame, but by a patient, persistent light, the kind that only appears to those willing to walk through darkness to find it. This is the bedtime story of Marie Curie, and how her discovery softened suffering, transformed medicine, and illuminated the path for generations to come. Marie Skłodowska entered the world on a cold November day in 1867, in a city where even the air seemed to whisper caution. Warsaw was not free then. It lived under the heavy hand of the Russian Empire, its language restricted, its schools watched, its people expected to bow their heads and say nothing. Children grew up understanding that some truths had to be hidden, and that curiosity could be a quiet form of rebellion. Her parents, Władysław and Bronisława, were teachers, people who believed, almost stubbornly, that the mind must stay awake even when the world around it closes its eyes. Their home was filled with books, maps, whispered lessons, and an unspoken hope that knowledge could outlast oppression. Marie, the youngest of 5, absorbed it all with the intensity of someone who sensed early that learning would be her lifeline. Yet her childhood was not one of easy warmth. Money was scarce, illness hovered constantly, and the political tension outside their door crept into the family like a draft through cracked windows. When Marie was still very young, the Russian authorities confiscated her father's teaching position. His commitment to Polish identity, to education, to dignity, all of it was marked as dangerous. The family's income evaporated, the future narrowed, but there was something unusual in the child who watched all this unfold. She was small, quiet, almost delicate, yet her eyes held a fierce brightness, as if she were studying the world rather than merely living in it. She remembered everything she saw, the austere schoolrooms, the worn textbooks passed between students in secret, the tension on her parents' faces when the authorities made their rounds. While other children played, Marie observed. She listened, and slowly, a sense of purpose began to form in her that she could not yet name. At night, when the city settled into uneasy silence, she would lie awake in the narrow bedroom she shared with her sisters, tracing constellations with her finger against the dark. She imagined forces hidden beneath the surface of things, the way metals shimmered in sunlight, the strange pull of magnets, the invisible threads tying the stars together. She did not yet know the words for what she felt: science, discovery, transformation. These were ideas waiting in the future, waiting for her, but the foundations were being laid quietly. A child raised in a world of restrictions, a family clinging to knowledge as an act of resistance, a girl who sensed, with a kind of intuitive certainty, that the universe was full of secrets worth pursuing. Long before Marie Curie became the woman whose discoveries would save millions, she was simply a child standing in the shadow of empire, listening, learning, and preparing herself for a life that would demand extraordinary courage. And already, though she did not yet understand it, the light she would one day uncover was beginning to take shape inside her, a steady, patient glow waiting for the right moment to shine. In Warsaw, knowledge was both a necessity and a danger. Schools existed, yes, but they belonged to the Russian Empire, designed not to broaden young minds, but to contain them. Polish history was forbidden, Polish language discouraged, Polish identity treated as a fault to be corrected. Children were taught what authorities approved and nothing more. Curiosity was something to be monitored, not encouraged. But in the Skłodowski home, the rules of the outside world seemed to soften. Marie's father, Władysław, kept shelves filled with physics instruments he could no longer use at work. Glass prisms, coils of wire, magnets, delicate pieces of apparatus that shimmered with the promise of hidden laws. When officials confiscated the school's equipment, he quietly brought home whatever he could save. To him, science was not a subject. It was a refuge, a form of truth that no empire could extinguish. Marie would watch him demonstrate experiments late at night, long after her siblings had grown tired. A flicker of electricity, a trembling compass needle, a fragment of light breaking into color. These small acts felt almost magical. They suggested a world larger than the one she'd been told to accept, a world where the invisible could be measured, understood, illuminated, and Marie wanted to understand it all, but her path to learning was never straightforward. When she turned 10, tragedy struck again. Tuberculosis took her sister Zofia, and soon after, her mother, exhausted, ill, and worn down by grief, passed away as well. The house grew quieter. The warmth that once held the family together dimmed, and into that silence, Marie poured herself even more fiercely into her studies. Yet even brilliance could not change the rules set against her. Girls in Russian-controlled Poland were not permitted to pursue advanced education. There were no university doors open to them, no scholarships, no laboratories waiting with microscopes and glassware. Ambition for a girl was expected to be small, a private flame kept hidden away. But Marie's flame refused to dim. She found her opportunity in what came to be known as the Flying University, an underground network of secret classes conducted in private apartments across Warsaw. No signs, no formal classrooms, just whispered schedules, locked doors, and teachers willing to risk punishment to keep the Polish mind alive. Marie walked through the city with her books hidden beneath her coat, never knowing if the next knock on the door would be a fellow student or an inspector. Inside those cramped rooms, she encountered ideas she was never meant to see: advanced chemistry, higher mathematics, literature banned by the authorities. The air was thick with both fear and exhilaration. Every lesson was an act of defiance. Every page she turned was a step outside the boundaries set for her. And Marie understood that if she wanted more, if she truly wanted to become a scientist, she would need to leave Warsaw entirely. Her sister Bronya dreamed of doing the same, becoming a doctor abroad. But there was no money for two. Someone would have to sacrifice their future so the other could succeed. Marie did not hesitate. She agreed to work as a governess for years, sending her earnings to support Bronya's studies in Paris, with the quiet promise that one day, somehow, Bronya would help her in return. It was a plan built on hope and endurance, a promise between sisters, a gamble against the rigid world around them. Marie was still only a teenager, standing on the edge of adulthood, already understanding that brilliance alone would never be enough. To become the woman she dreamed of being, she would need persistence, resilience, and above all, patience. For now, she learned in secret by candlelight, her eyes moving across forbidden pages, building the foundation of a scientific future the world did not yet believe she had the right to claim. Soon, she would step beyond the borders of Poland. But first, she had to survive the years that tested her determination more than any laboratory ever would. Grief entered Marie's life quietly at first, like a shadow slipping beneath a door. It began with small absences, a cough behind a closed room, a meal left untouched, a voice that trembled where it once rang clear, and then, suddenly, the absences became permanent. Her older sister, Zofia, radiant and full of promise, succumbed to typhus when Marie was barely 10. The illness swept through the home like an unseen wind, stealing warmth from the rooms and leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than winter air. The loss stunned her. Death, once an idea whispered about, had stepped into the house and claimed someone she loved. Only 2 years later, grief returned. This time it was Marie's mother, worn down by tuberculosis and the endless strain of holding the family together under occupation. Marie watched helplessly as her mother's strength faded day by day. She remembered the soft hand on her forehead, the gentle voice insisting she must continue studying, that knowledge would be her shield in a harsh world. When that voice finally fell silent, Marie felt something permanent shift inside her. Childhood, for all its small joys and curiosities, had ended. She became the quiet one, the girl who rarely cried, who retreated into books, who carried sorrow like a stone tucked beneath her ribs. The world outside continued in its rhythm. Russian patrols marching down Warsaw's streets, schools enforcing rules, neighbors whispering about unrest. But for Marie, the landscape had changed. She had entered a new kind of exile, one made not from borders but from loss. And with loss came responsibility. Her father, still grieving, struggled to provide for 5 children. The family took in boarders to survive. Every room of their home filled with strangers, their footsteps, their conversations, their presence, a constant reminder of how precarious life had become. Marie watched her father give up his position, watched the family's finances dissolve, watched adulthood approach before she was ready to meet it. She studied harder. She worked quietly. She tried to make herself small so no one would worry about her. But beneath the surface, something powerful was forming. A resolve, a discipline, a deep hunger to understand the world, not as a place of random suffering, but as a place governed by laws. Laws she might one day uncover. Pain became a strange kind of fuel. In the evenings, when her siblings slept, Marie opened her notebooks and poured herself into mathematics and physics, the subjects her father loved. Numbers did not falter the way human lives did. Equations did not disappear without warning. Scientific truths did not abandon her. They offered structure, clarity, stability in a life defined by uncertainty. Still, grief was not the only burden she carried. As she grew older, the limitations placed on Polish women became clearer. Her dreams of higher education, the ones her mother once encouraged, collided with the strict reality that girls were not welcome in universities. Her brilliance, her discipline, her extraordinary memory meant little in a system designed to ignore women entirely. But Marie refused to surrender to circumstance. She decided that if the world around her would not open its doors, she would find another path. She took on tutoring jobs. She began saving money with a determination that surprised even her father. She made a quiet agreement with herself. One day she would leave. She would find a place where knowledge was not forbidden or rationed. She would pursue the scientific future she felt calling to her like a distant star. Yet even as she dreamed of escape, she remained tethered by duty to her sister Bronya, to her struggling father, to the memory of the mother who wanted her to flourish. By the time Marie reached her late teens, she was no longer simply a daughter or student. She was the quiet anchor of a family shaped by grief, a young woman who had learned far too early that strength often comes wrapped in silence. Soon the weight she carried would lead her down a path of sacrifice. Soon she would exchange her own dreams for the promise of another's future. And soon, without knowing it, she would set in motion the journey that would one day change the world of medicine forever. For most young women in Warsaw, dreams of higher education ended not with failure, but with inevitability. Universities in the Russian Empire did not open their doors to women. Ambition was something to be tucked quietly away, like a letter that could never be mailed. But Marie Skłodowska did not hide her dreams. She carried them with her like a small, stubborn flame. What she did learn, however, was patience. She and her sister Bronya had once made a pact, whispered late at night. One would work so the other could study in Paris, the only place where women were allowed to chase the impossible. They decided Bronya would go first, become a doctor. Then, when she earned enough to live independently, she would help Marie follow. It was a reasonable plan. It was also a painful one. To make it work, Marie had to give up her own chance at leaving Poland for many years. She had to trade her notebooks for an income, her daily studies for labor, her ambitions for duty. And while she agreed willingly, even lovingly, the sacrifice cut deep. At 18, Marie left her father's house and stepped into someone else's world, the world of the wealthy families who hired governesses to educate their children. She traveled to the countryside where broad fields stretched beneath quiet skies, far from the intellectual promise of Warsaw. The family was polite at first. Their home was large, elegant, lined with rooms Marie would never be allowed to enter freely. She lived in the small attic quarters, where the ceiling sloped low and the nights were colder than she expected. But she carried her books with her. She carried her hope with her. And she carried the memory of Bronya studying in Paris, a reminder that each day of work was a stepping stone to her own future. Yet life as a governess was not gentle. The days were long, teaching lessons, managing the children, performing tasks that stretched far beyond her job description. She was expected to be invisible yet indispensable, perfectly educated yet socially insignificant. The hierarchy of the household was unmistakable, and Marie stood near the bottom. Even her brilliance was an inconvenience. The household admired her intelligence only when it amused them. They did not know what to do with a young woman who solved mathematical problems effortlessly, who read scientific texts by candlelight, who seemed to disappear into thought the moment chores were finished. But Marie endured because she had no choice. And then something unexpected happened, something that threatened the fragile balance she had built. She fell in love. The family's eldest son, a thoughtful young man with an appreciation for literature and ideas, began to admire her. They shared books. They talked in quiet corners. He saw her not as a governess, but as a mind equal to his own. And for the first time, Marie felt the warmth of affection that was not one-sided or imagined. But his parents saw the danger immediately. A governess, no matter how brilliant, was unacceptable as a match for their son. They warned her. They warned him. They made it clear that if he pursued her, he would lose his inheritance, his status, his place in society. The young man hesitated, and when he hesitated, Marie understood. She ended the relationship quietly, with the same resolve she used to make every painful decision in her life. She returned to her attic room and cried for the first time in many months, not only for the loss of love, but for the confirmation of something she had sensed since childhood. Her path would never be simple. Her dreams would require solitude, and she would have to walk through life trusting her own strength above all else. So she worked, and she saved. Every ruble she earned went to Bronya in Paris. Every hour of loneliness strengthened the discipline she would later need to become a scientist. The sacrifice lasted years. Years of teaching other people's children while her own notebooks filled slowly with self-study. Years of hunger for knowledge that she fed only in stolen hours after dark. Years of reminding herself that endurance was not a punishment but a bridge that led to Paris, to the Sorbonne, to the laboratory, to discoveries that would change medicine forever. But for now she remained a governess in an isolated Polish estate, pushing through heartbreak and exhaustion, guided by a dream so distant that it sometimes felt like a memory from another life. And yet she held on, because she believed even in the quietest moments that the universe had not shown her its secrets yet. When Marie finally stepped off the train in Paris, she carried almost nothing with her. a worn suitcase, a pocket of saved coins, and a dream that had survived heartbreak, grief, and years of sacrifice. The city stretched out before her like a promise she had repeated to herself too many times to count. Here, at last, she could learn. Here, she could become who she was meant to be. Paris in the 1890s was alive in a way Warsaw had never been. Gas lamps glowed along wide boulevards. Students hurried through the streets with notebooks tucked under their arms. Cafes hummed with arguments about art, philosophy, politics, and in the heart of the city stood the Sorbonne, a world she had imagined so many times that it felt almost unreal to finally approach its doors. But the beauty of Paris did not erase its harshness. Marie's savings, already small, vanished quickly in the expensive capital. She rented a tiny attic room under the roof of a crumbling building, a space so narrow she could touch both walls at once, so cold that winter winds slipped through the cracks and froze water in her wash basin overnight. To save money, she often chose hunger over comfort, eating little more than tea and bread for days. Yet every morning she rose before dawn. Wrapped in layers of worn clothing, she walked through the chilly streets to the Sorbonne, clutching her books with hands stiff from the cold. And inside those lecture halls, something extraordinary happened. For the first time, no one laughed at her ambition. No one tried to silence her questions. No one demanded she stop learning because she was a woman. She sat among rows of men, the only woman in many classes, and listened with an intensity that startled her professors. She absorbed mathematics, physics, chemistry, sometimes studying for 15 hours a day. Her mind finally unleashed, processed knowledge faster than her body could keep up. At times she felt she was devouring entire libraries simply to catch up on the years she had lost. But brilliance came with a price. There were days she fainted from hunger, days she shivered through exams because she couldn't afford heating, days when exhaustion blurred the words on the page and she feared she would lose everything she had worked for. Still, she refused to slow down. The students around her soon learned that the quiet Polish girl in the back row, the one who wore the same coat every day and took notes until her fingers cramped, was always the last to leave the classroom. And often, long after the corridors emptied, Marie remained seated under the dim lights, reviewing formulas until sleep pulled at her eyes. Her professors noticed. One remarked that her mind was a force of nature, quiet, unassuming, and unstoppable. Another said she possessed the rarest kind of discipline, born from necessity. But Marie did not crave attention. She craved understanding. She wanted to know why the world behaved the way it did, why matter held together, why forces moved unseen, why the universe followed laws that no one had yet fully grasped. In Paris, her world widened and sharpened. She felt the loneliness of the city, yes, the hunger, the cold, the isolation of a foreigner living on the edge of survival. But she also felt an awakening unlike anything she had known before. Her dream was no longer distant. It was unfolding, slowly, painfully, beautifully, right in front of her. And soon the city that had tested her endurance would give her something she did not expect, a partner whose presence would shift the entire trajectory of her life. But for now, she remained a solitary figure climbing the narrow stairs to her attic each night, her books pressed to her chest, her breath visible in the cold air, whispering to herself that every hardship brought her one step closer to the discoveries waiting somewhere in the glow of her future. By the summer of 1894, Marie had carved out a life built almost entirely on discipline. Days at the Sorbonne shifted into evenings at the laboratory, and nights slipped by in her freezing attic where she studied by candlelight until exhaustion blurred the ink on the page. Her world was narrow but purposeful, like a tunnel with light at the very end. She needed nothing beyond her books, her equations, and the hope that science would one day embrace her fully. But life has a quiet way of widening the path. just when we believe it should stay narrow. Marie was searching for a suitable space to continue her research, a laboratory where she could study magnetic properties of steels, a subject so obscure that few cared about it. And so a mutual friend, Professor Józef Wierusz Kowalski, arranged for her to meet a physicist who might help. His name was Pierre Curie. He was already known in scientific circles, though not in the flamboyant, celebrated way of some Parisian intellects. Pierre was gentle, pale, almost shy in his movements. His hair had already begun to thin, and he wore clothes that seemed chosen more for comfort than for presentation. His eyes, however, held a deep and steady brilliance, the kind that did not announce itself but revealed itself quietly. The two first met in a small, sunlit office, cluttered with instruments and stacks of papers. Marie, still the shy Polish student with the heavy accent and worn coat, spoke softly, explaining her need for a workspace. Pierre listened intently, not impatiently, not dismissively, but with genuine curiosity. It was a quality she rarely encountered. He led her into his laboratory, an imperfect space, cluttered and drafty, but filled with possibilities. Copper wires coiled like vines across tables. Dusty metal spheres hung from threads. Electrometers and quartz balances sat waiting, as though eager for hands that understood them. Marie ran her fingers lightly over the instruments, not touching, just sensing, the way a musician might approach a new violin. Pierre watched her and felt something shift inside him, a recognition almost. He later wrote that Marie possessed an exceptional intelligence and an admirable spirit of determination. But in that moment, he did not think of admiration or intelligence. He simply saw someone who loved science with the same quiet devotion he did. Their conversations began with magnetism, but soon drifted into deeper territory: the nature of matter, the mysteries of electricity, the strange beauty of invisible forces. Pierre found himself seeking her company, drawn to her clarity of thought and her steady seriousness. Marie, who had formed a fortress of solitude around herself, felt the first gentle crack in its walls. Pierre was unlike anyone she had met, gentle without weakness, brilliant without arrogance. Where others spoke loudly to hide uncertainties, he spoke softly because he was certain, and he treated her not as a curiosity, a rare woman in science, but as an equal, a partner in thought. He began inviting her to walk with him along the paths of the Seine, where the city glowed with evening lamps and the hum of distant conversation. Their discussions flowed easily, uninterrupted by self-consciousness or expectation. They shared a quiet rhythm, two minds orbiting the same invisible questions. But Marie, ever disciplined, ever cautious, did not let herself imagine anything beyond friendship. Her dreams were still fragile, her life still unsteady. She feared that affection might pull her away from her purpose. Pierre, however, felt the unmistakable pull of something more. He wrote letters, gentle, earnest letters, expressing admiration for her mind, her humility, her determination. Marie read them slowly, her hands trembling slightly, unsure of how to respond. By then, Pierre had become so certain that he told her plainly, "It would be a beautiful thing if we could spend our lives together." Marie hesitated. Her heart whispered yes, but her sense of duty whispered no. She needed to return to Poland someday. She needed to help her family. She needed to continue her studies without distraction. Still, Pierre waited, quietly, patiently, unfailingly. He offered her not a life of comfort, but a life of partnership, the rarest kind, where two minds do not compete but converge. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Marie began to feel something she had never felt before, a future that included someone else. Their meeting, which had begun with instruments and equations, was becoming something profound, the beginning of a collaboration, a marriage, and a revolution in science. But neither of them knew yet how deeply their lives would become intertwined, or how their shared curiosity would soon lead them into a realm of discovery where light itself seemed to come alive. By the time Marie concluded her studies at the Sorbonne, earning first place in physics, second in mathematics, she had grown accustomed to the quiet astonishment her achievements stirred. Professors admired her, fellow students respected her, yet none of them truly understood the force that drove her. But Pierre did. He saw the questions she carried, the ones that hovered just beyond the edges of known science. He saw the way her eyes narrowed slightly when she encountered something unexplained, and when she told him she wanted to search for a research topic worthy of her first major scientific work, he felt something stir, a recognition that her brilliance needed room far larger than a classroom or a laboratory table. It was Becquerel's discovery that caught her attention. In 1896, Henri Becquerel had found that uranium salts emitted a strange kind of energy, an invisible force capable of penetrating paper, fog, even human flesh. He did not understand it. No one did. Scientists had no tools for categorizing such a phenomenon. It seemed to come from nowhere, obey no known laws. It fascinated Marie instantly. Invisible, persistent, a force that did not diminish over time, something alive inside matter itself. She began testing uranium, carefully measuring the electrical currents produced when the mysterious rays passed through air. What she found astonished her. The intensity of the radiation depended solely on the amount of uranium present, not the compound, not the environment, not the preparation. This was not a chemical effect. It was something deeper, more fundamental. The atom, long believed indivisible, seemed to be whispering a secret. But Marie was not satisfied. If uranium behaved this way, she reasoned, perhaps other minerals did too. So she turned her attention to a heavy, black, almost dull-looking mineral, pitchblende. Pitchblende was known for containing uranium, but its behavior puzzled her. When she measured its radiation using her instruments, primitive but precise, she discovered something shocking. Pitchblende was 4 times more radioactive than uranium itself. This, she knew, was impossible. A compound could not be more active than its most active element. Something else was inside the mineral, something far stronger, far stranger, far more potent than ordinary uranium. Marie leaned over her notebook, her handwriting quick and urgent, and whispered the question that would define the rest of her life. What hidden substance inside pitchblende gives off such extraordinary rays? The idea pulsed inside her like a heartbeat. Perhaps the universe held elements that had never been seen, never been named. Perhaps the periodic table was incomplete, but to prove it, she needed more pitchblende, and pitchblende was expensive. Pierre watched her struggle. The tight budget, the need for equipment, the sheer weight of the problem. And without hesitation, he stepped beside her, not as a supervisor, not as a protector, but as a partner who believed her instincts more than anyone else. Together they secured crates of the mineral from mines in Bohemia. They stored them in a shed behind the school where Pierre taught, a space so ill-equipped that cold winds swept through the windows and a chalky dust from the mineral settled over everything like a thin layer of ash. But Marie was undeterred. She chipped the mineral with hammers, crushed it with iron rods, stirred it in cauldrons over open flames, and carried steaming mixtures across the room with thick gloves that never fully protected her hands. Her apron grew stained. Her skin grew irritated, her lungs ached from the fumes, but the mystery demanded persistence. For hours, days, months, she separated the mineral into fractions, measuring each one with painful precision, and slowly patterns began to emerge, faint signals like whispers from the universe. One fraction glowed with more activity than the last, then another, even stronger. Something was there, something real. Pierre came into the shed one evening to find her standing motionless, over a set of readings, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked up at him with quiet intensity and said, "We have found a new element." Pierre's eyes widened. The air shifted. The world felt suddenly larger. But Marie wasn't finished. "There may be another. Two new elements, hidden inside an unremarkable rock. Two forces more powerful than anything science had ever seen." Pitchblende had been a mystery. Now it was a revelation, and soon the Curies would step into a realm of discovery that glowed, literally, with dangerous beauty. In the chill of the makeshift laboratory, surrounded by cracked windows and iron pots simmering over open flames, Marie began to notice something profound. The strange rays she measured, the invisible whispers coming from pitchblende, did not fade, weaken, or depend on external conditions. They seemed to emerge from the very heart of matter itself, steady and relentless. This was not a chemical reaction, not magnetism, not electricity. It was something entirely new. Marie moved through the lab like someone following a faint trail in the dark, guided by intuition, persistence, and a kind of internal compass that pointed toward truth. She tested every fraction of the mineral with her electrometer, the delicate instrument Pierre and his brother had once designed with extraordinary precision. Every reading reinforced the same idea, like a refrain repeating through her notebook. Matter was releasing energy from within. One evening, as she sat hunched over her notes, the sounds of Paris fading into the distance beyond the courtyard, Marie paused. She tapped her pencil against the paper, searching for a way to describe this phenomenon. This steady emission that seemed to defy the laws of physics as she knew them. No existing word could hold what she observed. This was not luminescence, not phosphorescence, not decay in any traditional sense. So she created her own radioactivity, a quiet word, almost delicate, chosen by a woman who rarely wasted speech, and yet it held within it an entire revolution, the first step toward understanding the structure of matter, the atom, and the forces that shaped the universe. Marie wrote it into her notebook with the calm assurance of someone naming a truth rather than inventing one. She had always believed that nature's secrets could be discovered. She simply did not expect to be the one drawing back the curtain on such a fundamental mystery. Radioactivity. The word glowed on the page. Simple, elegant, powerful. Pierre read it over her shoulder, nodded slowly and whispered, "Yes, yes, that is exactly what it is." But the discovery was only the beginning. Marie's measurements showed that pitchblende's enormous activity came from something far more concentrated than uranium, something deeper, something almost unimaginably potent. She felt the weight of the realization press against her ribs, not fear, but awe. If radioactivity originated from the atom itself, then the atom was not the unbreakable, indivisible sphere scientists had assumed for centuries. It was dynamic, alive with energy, capable of releasing power that had been hidden since the beginning of time. The implications were staggering. It meant that the matter around them, the earth, the air, their own bodies, contained forces humanity had never imagined. Forces that shaped stars. Forces that could transform medicine, energy, and perhaps one day the world. But Marie, humble and methodical, focused not on the grander possibilities, but on the next step. She now had a name for the phenomenon. What she needed next was proof. Tangible, irrefutable evidence of the new elements hiding inside pitchblende. Her research grew more demanding. Her hands grew rough from lifting heavy pots of boiling material. Her eyes stung from fumes. Her clothes absorbed the scent of chemicals that never fully washed away. And yet she felt no hesitation. She believed, with a conviction sharpened by years of sacrifice, that she stood at the threshold of something extraordinary. She felt the universe leaning toward her, offering a secret through faint signals carved into the mineral's dark surface. Late at night, as she closed her lab notebooks and extinguished the lamps, The word lingered in her thoughts like a soft pulse. Radioactivity, a word that would define her life's work, a word that would reshape medicine forever, a word born not in comfort or glory, but in a cold shed where a determined woman followed curiosity into the heart of matter itself. The discovery of radioactivity opened a doorway, but stepping through it required courage, the kind that endures cold, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Marie felt that courage grow inside her, steady and unyielding, as she and Pierre continued their work in the shabby, drafty shed that served as their laboratory. It was no place for delicacy. Rain leaked through the roof. Winter winds rattled the cracked panes. The floor was uneven, the furniture mismatched, the air thick with the metallic scent of pulverized rock. And yet inside this humble space, something revolutionary was taking shape. Marie believed pitchblende held two new elements, one faint and one astonishingly strong. Proving it, however, meant processing vast quantities of the mineral, separating it step by step until the hidden components could finally be revealed. It was work no scientist had attempted before, work that no institution wanted to fund, work that demanded hours of stirring pots over open flames, lifting heavy cauldrons, and performing delicate measurements with instruments that seemed almost too fragile for the task. Still, Marie persisted. She crushed tons of pitchblende into powder, her hands trembling from the effort. She heated it until acrid fumes swirled upward, stinging her eyes and clinging to her clothes. She washed and filtered and distilled each fraction, scribbling notes with a precision that never faltered, even as fatigue gnawed at her bones. And then, one summer afternoon in 1898, she found it. A faint but unmistakable surge of radioactivity emanated from one of her fractions, stronger than uranium, but not as powerful as the element she believed lay even deeper within the mineral. Marie and Pierre measured it again and again. Each time the result was clear. This was something new, something the world had never seen. Marie named it polonium after her beloved Poland, a quiet tribute to the homeland that could not yet recognize her brilliance, a place whose dreams she carried in her heart. But polonium was only the beginning. The second element, the one responsible for the astonishing power of pitchblende, remained elusive. Its signal pulsed faintly at first, like a heartbeat behind a wall, but Marie could feel it calling to her, demanding deeper exploration. Weeks became months. The shed grew unbearably hot in summer, freezing in winter, the air perpetually filled with vapor from boiling mixtures. Marie's clothing became permanently stained from chemicals. Her fingertips cracked, her health waned, but her determination only sharpened. She began isolating fractions so intensely radioactive that they seemed almost to glow. Pierre watched her with both admiration and fear, sensing, though he did not yet understand, that this energy carried not only promise but danger. In December 1898, after countless failures and exhausting precision, the signal finally burst through with unmistakable strength. The second new element was there, radiant, potent, almost alive. Marie wrote the words in her notebook with quiet triumph. "We are calling it radium." Radium, a substance so powerful it seemed to defy nature itself. Radium, whose blue-green glow in the darkness felt both magical and haunting. Radium, the element that would change medicine, illuminate hopes, and cast long shadows over the years to come. When Marie held the tiny glass vial containing their purified radium salt, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the substance itself, but from the knowledge that she had reached into the heart of matter and drawn out something luminous. The Sisters of Light, polonium and radium, had finally been named. Paris took notice. Scientists whispered of the young Polish woman whose brilliance rivaled the greatest minds of the era, and in the dark corners of the shed, the faint glow of radium cast a soft, shimmering light across the tables, as if nature itself were acknowledging her discovery. But this light carried a cost no one yet understood, a cost that would haunt Marie in ways unimaginable. For now, though, there was only wonder, only the calm, breathtaking realization that she had stepped into a new realm of science, a realm where matter glowed, where atoms spoke, where the unseen finally revealed its brilliance. And the world, though unaware, was already changing. The discovery of radium and polonium should have brought Marie nothing but triumph. After all the years of poverty, sacrifice, and backbreaking labor in the drafty shed, she had done the impossible. She had given the world two new elements, revealed a phenomenon that rewrote the laws of physics, and opened a door into the heart of matter itself. But recognition is never simple, and for a woman in science, it is rarely kind. As news of the Curie's discoveries spread across Europe, scientists marveled at the significance of the work. Radium's intense radioactivity fascinated them. Polonium's strange behavior puzzled them. Laboratories buzzed with excitement. Newspapers printed glowing articles about the mysterious new rays. Yet praise did not always land where it belonged. Too often, articles praised Pierre alone. They referred to Marie merely as his assistant, his wife, or a collaborator, despite the fact that it was her idea to study pitchblende, her measurements that revealed radioactivity, her relentless persistence that led to the isolation of radium itself. Quietly, subtly, the world tried to shift the spotlight away from her. Pierre, gentle and principled, corrected journalists whenever he could. It was Marie, he said again and again, who discovered radioactivity. But even his words could not push back all the doubts, all the biases, all the assumptions that brilliance must belong to a man. Marie felt the sting of invisibility, but she pushed forward. Her work mattered far more than applause. Still, she could not ignore the fatigue creeping into her bones. Years of exposure to radioactive materials were beginning to affect her health. Her hands burned, her joints ached, her skin showed mysterious irritations. She and Pierre did not yet understand the danger. No one did. But the toll was undeniable. Yet the work continued. In 1903, the Swedish Academy of Sciences began considering nominees for the Nobel Prize in Physics. Pierre's name appeared almost immediately, alongside Henri Becquerel. But Marie's name was missing, not an oversight, a deliberate omission. To the Academy, the idea of awarding the world's most prestigious scientific honor to a woman seemed unthinkable. Her work, they argued, was merely an extension of Pierre's. But one member of the nomination committee, a mathematician named Magnus Gösta Mittag-Leffler, recognized the injustice. He contacted Pierre privately, urging him to correct the record. When Pierre learned Marie was to be excluded, he responded with quiet outrage. He wrote to the Academy, "Marie Curie has played a considerable role in the discovery. Do not forget her." And so, reluctantly, the committee amended their decision. On a cold December day in 1903, Marie Curie walked into the hall of the Swedish Academy as the first woman in history to win a Nobel Prize, shared with Pierre and Becquerel for their groundbreaking work on radioactivity. The moment was monumental, but Marie did not bask in glory. She felt shy, small beneath the grandeur of the hall, her hands clasped tightly together. She spoke softly when asked for remarks, and afterward she returned to Paris not as a celebrity, but as a scientist who knew her greatest challenges were still ahead. Fame brought attention, but it also brought skepticism. Some questioned whether her discoveries were truly hers. Some whispered that she had risen too quickly. Some insisted she step aside and let Pierre take the lead. But Marie had weathered harsher storms. She had lived through grief, poverty, rejection, and years of invisibility. Doubt, when it came from others, no longer frightened her. Pierre, ever the quiet guardian of truth, stood beside her in every lecture, every interview, every accolade. They were equals in life, in love, and in discovery. Yet even as they celebrated their shared achievement, Marie sensed a shift within herself. The Nobel Prize was not an ending, it was not even a summit. It was a doorway, one that led to deeper mysteries, greater discoveries, and challenges that no honor could prepare her for. For now, though, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She held the medal in her hand, its golden surface warm under the lamplight, and thought not of fame or recognition, but of the long road behind her. The cold attic in Paris, the heartbreak in Poland, the weary nights in the shed, the shimmering glow of radium. And she whispered to herself, almost as if reassuring the girl she once was, it was worth it. In the years that followed their Nobel Prize, Marie and Pierre worked side by side with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Their laboratory was still modest, still cold in winter and stifling in summer, but to them it was a sanctuary, a place where thought, curiosity, and love intertwined. Their daughters, Irene and Eve, brought warmth to their small Paris apartment. Evenings were spent reading, playing music, or discussing science with visitors who admired the quiet brilliance of the Curie household. Pierre often wrote in his journals that he felt complete, a word he had rarely used before Marie entered his life. But the peace was fragile, and fate, indifferent to genius or goodness, had already cast its shadow across their path. On a rainy April afternoon in 1906, Paris was alive with the usual bustle, horse-drawn carriages moving quickly down slick streets, pedestrians hurrying beneath umbrellas, the city humming with activity. Pierre was on his way to a meeting at the Academy of Sciences. He walked instead of taking a carriage, as he often did, lost in thought about crystalline structures and gravitational theories he hoped to explore. Marie, back in their laboratory, was preparing notes for their next joint project. The atmosphere was calm, almost tender in its normalcy. She expected Pierre to return by evening, perhaps tired, but ready to share a quiet meal with his family. But he never returned. A single moment, brief, sudden, and cruel, changed everything. Pierre slipped while crossing a busy street. A heavy horse-drawn wagon approached too quickly for him to avoid. In an instant that no one could prevent, he fell beneath its wheels. The accident was fatal. The news traveled slowly, carried by whispers before it reached the laboratory. When Marie heard it, she did not cry, not at first. She simply stood still, completely still, as if the world around her had paused. Shock, like a cold wind, passed through her. Her hands trembled, her breath caught in her chest. She remained frozen, unable to accept the words. Pierre, her companion in every experiment, every sacrifice, every dream, gone. And then quietly, painfully, the realization spread through her like a widening crack in glass. The man who believed in her when others doubted, who walked beside her through weathered streets, who looked at her not as an assistant but as an equal, the other half of her scientific soul, would never open the laboratory door again. For days, Marie moved through her home as if through a fog. The girls clung to her, sensing the gravity of the loss even if they could not fully understand it. The laboratory stood silent, the instruments untouched, the faint glow of radium dimmed by grief. The world mourned Pierre Curie, the esteemed physicist, but Marie mourned the man she loved. In her journal she wrote, "I am unable to express the grief which overwhelms me. All has gone, all has ended for me." But even in the depths of despair, a small spark of resolve flickered within her, a spark that would not let the work they shared vanish, the discoveries they made together, the questions they had begun to explore, the future they envisioned. These still lived, and in time Marie would realize that the only way to honor Pierre's memory was to continue, not with bravado, not with ambition, but with the same quiet dedication that had bound them together. Pierre's death shattered her world, but it did not extinguish her purpose. In the midst of sorrow, she returned to the laboratory, to the instruments he touched, the notes he wrote, the elements they discovered together. The room felt different now, emptier, echoing with absence. Yet it was also the last place where she still felt close to him. And so, step by step, she lifted the weight of responsibility he once carried beside her. She took his teaching post. She continued their research. She held their family together. Grief remained, a constant companion, but so did strength, a strength forged through loss, sacrifice, and love. Marie Curie was alone now, but she was not finished, and the world, though unaware, was about to witness the next chapter of a woman who refused to let tragedy dim the light she and Pierre had ignited. Grief changes a person in ways the world rarely sees. On the surface, Marie Curie returned to her work, composed, determined, even serene in her quiet resilience. But beneath that calm exterior lived a sorrow that no award, no recognition, no discovery could erase. And yet the laboratory called to her. The small wooden tables still held Pierre's notebooks, his handwriting crisp and steady. His instruments sat untouched, as if waiting for him to return and take one final measurement. Marie could not bear to move them. Instead, she slipped into his place at the desk and continued the work they had begun together, letting the rhythm of research carry her through days that otherwise felt unbearably empty. Her decision to continue Pierre's research was not an act of ambition. It was an act of devotion. She understood better than anyone the significance of their discoveries, how radioactivity opened a window into the very structure of the atom, how radium's penetrating rays could reveal new forces and new pathways for healing. She had promised herself that Pierre's legacy would not end with tragedy, but the world around her was not gentle. Rumors swirled that she would fade away after Pierre's death, that her scientific brilliance had come solely from him. Some insisted she was too fragile to continue. Others believed she had reached the peak of her potential. Marie ignored them all. She worked 12-hour days in the laboratory, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes pushing her body beyond its limits. Her health suffered. She felt the strange burns on her skin, the fatigue that lingered, the aches in her bones, signs of radiation's harm that no one yet fully understood. But she pressed on. And in the years that followed Pierre's death, her research deepened. She isolated radium salts more purely than before. She mapped the laws governing radioactive decay. She uncovered mathematical relationships that tied together the mysteries she and Pierre had spent a lifetime exploring. Her work grew stronger, sharper, more revolutionary. By 1911, the scientific world could no longer look away. That year, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences nominated Marie Curie alone for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in recognition of her discovery of radium and polonium, her pioneering methods for isolating radioactive elements, and her foundational work in understanding radioactive substances. It was the first time in history a woman had been nominated for a second Nobel Prize. It was the first time anyone had ever been nominated in two scientific fields. But the honor came during one of the darkest periods in her personal life. The French press, eager for scandal, had begun circulating vicious stories about Marie's private affairs, twisting truth, exaggerating rumors, attempting to discredit her reputation. Headlines screamed with accusations. The tone was cruel, invasive, and deeply rooted in prejudice. Foreign, woman, independent, brilliant. To some, these were not triumphs but threats. The storm grew so fierce that the Swedish Academy quietly suggested she decline the award and avoid attending the ceremony in Stockholm. Marie's response was firm, almost icy in its clarity. "I believe that the prize has been awarded for my discovery of radium and polonium. I consider that there is no relation between my scientific work and the facts of my private life." She refused to retreat. She refused to bow to humiliation. She refused to let scandal overshadow truth. And so, despite the chaos swirling around her, Marie Curie became the first person in history, man or woman, to receive 2 Nobel Prizes. But unlike her first Nobel shared with Pierre, this one she accepted alone. There was no celebration, no embrace from her partner, no shared pride in a future they once dreamed of. She traveled to Stockholm quietly, her posture straight, her expression composed. She delivered lectures with the calm authority of a scientist who understood exactly what she had accomplished and why it mattered. And then, just as quietly, she returned to Paris to continue her work. She had won one of the greatest honors ever bestowed upon a scientist, but she won it in silence, in solitude, in the shadow of grief and scrutiny. Yet the world could not ignore the truth. Marie Curie had done what no one else had ever achieved. She had reshaped science twice. She had uncovered new elements, identified new forces, and opened the door to modern nuclear understanding. She had proven beyond question that her mind was one of the most extraordinary of the age. And though the recognition came during a time of personal turmoil, the legacy of that second Nobel would echo far beyond the pain that surrounded it. Marie Curie stood alone, but unbroken, and the discoveries she carried forward would soon change not only physics and chemistry, but medicine itself. The year 1911 should have been one of triumph for Marie Curie. Her discoveries had reshaped science. Her second Nobel Prize had solidified her place in history, and the world, slowly and reluctantly, was beginning to understand the magnitude of her work. But fame is a fragile companion, and in a world not yet ready for a woman of her brilliance, admiration could turn into hostility with shocking speed. After Pierre's death, Marie's world had grown unbearably quiet. She poured herself into her research, raising her daughters, and keeping alive the memory of the man who had shared her scientific soul. The loneliness, however, was profound, and so it was perhaps inevitable that a bond would form between Marie and a colleague who understood her grief. Paul Langevin, a talented physicist who had once studied under Pierre. Their friendship deepened into an emotional connection. It was a relationship built not on scandal, but on shared ideas, shared loss, and the human need for understanding. But Paul's marriage, strained long before Marie entered his life, became the weapon used against her. When private letters were stolen and leaked to the public, the French press erupted with fury. Newspapers printed her name in bold type, surrounded by accusations and insinuations. They painted her as a foreigner who had betrayed France, as a woman who had overstepped her place, as a scientist who had climbed too high. Headlines dripped with cruelty. Crowds gathered outside her home, shouting insults. Stones were thrown at her windows. Letters filled with hatred arrived daily. Even some fellow scientists, who once respected her, distanced themselves. It was not the first time she had faced prejudice, but it was the darkest. What hurt most was not the gossip itself, but how eagerly society turned against her. Despite her discoveries, despite her contributions to humanity, she was still seen by many as an outsider. A Polish immigrant, a woman in a man's world, a figure too brilliant to be forgiven for being human. During this storm, Marie's health declined sharply. Her hands trembled, exhaustion pulled at her. The emotional weight pressed heavily on the physical toll that years of radiation exposure had already carved into her body. And then, at the height of this chaos, as if to test her to the breaking point, a letter arrived from the Nobel Committee. They had heard the rumors. They had read the newspapers. They quietly suggested she should not travel to Sweden for the ceremony. They hinted that withdrawing might spare her embarrassment and them. Marie felt something inside her harden. After all she had endured, widowhood, poverty, years of labor in the shed, scientific battles, relentless questioning of her legitimacy. She refused to let scandal erase her truth, so she wrote back, her words calm and resolute. "I cannot accept the principle that the appreciation of the value of scientific work should be influenced by personal circumstances." With that single sentence, she reclaimed her dignity. She traveled to Stockholm. She delivered her lectures. She stood before the world with unwavering poise. The scandal raged on in Paris, but she rose above it with a quiet strength that could not be shaken. And gradually the fury began to fade. Scientists who had doubted her returned to her side. Students who admired her lined the halls of the Sorbonne. Her unwavering commitment to truth, both scientific and personal, spoke louder than rumor ever could. Marie had been attacked not for what she did, but for who she was. Yet she survived the storm, not by fighting it, but by standing firm, like a lighthouse battered by waves, yet refusing to dim. She was still grieving, still exhausted, still carrying scars no one could see, but she remained Marie Curie. Brilliant, determined, unbroken, and soon, with Europe on the brink of war, she would channel her suffering into something the world desperately needed, a new way to save lives. Long before hospitals learned to harness its strength, radium lived quietly in the dark, hidden in minerals, unknown to medicine, invisible to the human eye. Marie Curie had drawn it into the light with sheer determination, believing that understanding nature's hidden forces was a purpose worth dedicating a lifetime to. But she could not have predicted how profoundly that light would change the fate of the sick. In the early 1900s, medicine was in a fragile place. Doctors understood infections, surgeries, and fevers, but cancers remained shrouded in mystery, a terrifying diagnosis with little hope attached to it. Tumors grew silently, relentlessly, unaffected by any treatment known to modern science. Then came radium. Marie noticed something remarkable early in her studies. When radium salts came into contact with flesh, the skin reddened, blistered, and eventually deteriorated. These burns were painful and dangerous, but they revealed a strange truth. Radium could destroy living tissue. Most saw this as a threat. Marie saw a possibility. If radium could break down healthy cells, perhaps it could also destroy diseased ones. Cells that grew too quickly, too wildly, too uncontrollably. Cancer cells. The idea seemed radical, even frightening. Yet doctors were desperate for new approaches, and soon physicians across Europe began contacting Marie, hoping to obtain small samples of radium from her laboratory. She gave what she could, not for profit. She refused to patent her discoveries, not for fame. She avoided publicity whenever possible, but because she believed that knowledge belonged to humanity. And so radium found its way into hospitals. Doctors applied tiny tubes containing radium salts directly to tumors, allowing the rays to penetrate the malignant cells, weakening them, slowing their growth. In cases where surgery was impossible, radium offered a rare glimmer of hope. Recovery was far from guaranteed, but some patients improved, some tumors shrank, some lives, once given up as hopeless, were extended. Newspapers began calling radium a miracle substance. Patients traveled for days to reach clinics where treatments were offered. Medical journals filled with cautious optimism. Marie watched these developments with a mixture of pride and concern. She wanted radium to be used wisely, carefully, with respect for its power. She knew the element carried risks she was already beginning to feel in her own body. But she also knew it could ease suffering in ways nothing else could. Hospitals established the first radium therapy departments. Researchers developed new devices, small grains sealed in gold needles, inserted with precision into cancerous tissue. Doctors called it Curie therapy, an acknowledgement of the woman whose discovery made the impossible seem possible. In Paris, Marie opened the Radium Institute, a place dedicated not only to scientific research, but also to medical treatment. There, physicists, chemists, and doctors worked side by side, a unity of disciplines unheard of at the time. They studied radiation's effects, refined therapeutic techniques, and treated patients who arrived with quiet hope in their eyes. To Marie, this was her greatest reward. Not medals, not lectures, not fame, but the knowledge that something she had drawn out of the earth, something once hidden in the darkness of a mineral, was now bringing light into the darkest corners of human experience. Cancer was no longer a sentence handed down without mercy. It had an opponent now, a fragile, glowing, dangerous opponent, but an opponent nonetheless. And as Marie walked through the halls of the Radium Institute, seeing doctors apply radium with skill and compassion, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Pierre had once dreamed of using science for the betterment of humanity. In those quiet hospital rooms, that dream was alive again. Yet even as radium's healing potential unfolded, a greater storm approached, one that would demand everything she had left to give. Soon, Europe would plunge into war, and Marie Curie, the woman who had brought light from stone, would find herself at the front lines, carrying not radium in her hands, but another invention forged from her understanding of invisible rays, a discovery that would save countless lives. When the First World War erupted in 1914, the quiet rhythm of Marie Curie's laboratory changed overnight. Europe shook with the thunder of artillery, borders crumbled, and wounded soldiers filled hospitals faster than doctors could treat them. The scale of suffering was unlike anything the continent had ever seen. Marie watched the news unfold with a scientist's clarity and a mother's heart. Her two daughters were still young. Her institute was in danger, her research nearly impossible to continue, but it was the suffering of the soldiers that kept her awake at night. Thousands were dying not from their wounds, but from the inability of physicians to locate bullets or shrapnel embedded deep beneath the skin. Surgeons operated by touch and intuition, often blindly. Mistakes were inevitable. Marie knew something others did not: the power of invisible rays, the same rays she had studied for years. X-rays could see what human eyes could not. They could save lives, if only they could be brought to the front. And so, she made a decision that would alter the course of wartime medicine. She would bring X-ray machines to the battlefield, but France had few devices, fewer operators, and no one trained to manage the delicate imaging process under the chaos of war. The hospitals at the front were makeshift tents and overcrowded buildings, not laboratories with stable electricity and meticulously calibrated equipment. Marie looked at these obstacles and did what she always did. She found a way anyway. The birth of the Petite Curies, Marie designed and outfitted mobile radiology units, automobiles equipped with small generators, X-ray tubes, photographic plates, and lead shielding. Each vehicle could drive directly to the battlefield, set up an imaging station within minutes, and help surgeons locate dangerous fragments before performing operations. The soldiers called them les Petites Curies, the Little Curies. The name was affectionate, spoken with respect and relief. In those dark days, the glowing screens offered hope, but machines alone were not enough. So Marie, now nearly 50, trained herself as an X-ray technician. She learned to operate equipment, to maintain electrical generators, to make rapid exposures under battlefield conditions. She then began training others, dozens of women, many of them young, inexperienced, but eager to help. Within months, she established a radiology corps. Marie taught her volunteers how to position a wounded limb precisely, how to adjust exposure for thick bones or thin tissue, how to shield themselves from unnecessary radiation, how to develop the glass plates quickly so surgeons could act without delay. She led by example. In muddy fields, in makeshift tents, sometimes under the roar of artillery, Marie Curie worked tirelessly, a scientist transformed into a battlefield healer. She wore no elaborate uniform, only simple clothes and a determined expression. Doctors later wrote that her presence alone seemed to steady them. A mother and a pioneer. Her older daughter, Irene, still a teenager, insisted on helping. Marie tried to refuse, fearing the dangers of radiation and war. But Irene persisted, inheriting her mother's resolve. Soon she became one of the youngest X-ray operators in the French army. Together, mother and daughter traveled across France, driving through ruined towns, past long lines of wounded men, into hospitals where their equipment was welcomed like a miracle. By the end of the war, more than 1 million soldiers had received X-ray examinations thanks to the network Marie built. Her radiology units located bullets lodged deep within organs. They helped surgeons amputate less. They reduced infection. They saved countless lives. And yet Marie accepted no payment. She asked for no medals. She spoke rarely of her sacrifices, the exhaustion, the exposure, the strain. To her, this work was simply an extension of responsibility. If science could ease suffering, then it must. Late at night, when the battlefields finally quieted and the lamps of the Little Curies flickered out, Marie would sit for a moment inside the empty vehicle, hands folded, listening to the distant echoes of war. Her discoveries had once illuminated laboratories. Now they illuminated the wounded. And in the harsh glow of the X-ray plates, she saw not only fractured bones and foreign fragments, but a deeper truth. Science was not meant to remain in books or lecture halls. It was meant to serve life. War had a way of reshaping everything it touched: cities, nations, families, and even the lives of those who had never wished to be near a battlefield. For Marie Curie, the war did not only shift her work, it shifted her identity. She was no longer simply a scientist, a Nobel laureate, or a pioneer of radioactivity. In the eyes of soldiers and surgeons across France, she became something else, a force of calm in chaos, a scientist at war. The Little Curies were only the beginning. As Marie traveled from battlefield to battlefield, she witnessed devastation few civilians ever saw: endless lines of wounded men, overworked nurses, surgeons whose hands trembled not from fear but from exhaustion. Hospitals were filled beyond capacity. Supplies dwindled. Winter crept in through broken windows. Yet wherever Marie went, she carried purpose with her, as reliably as she carried her notebooks. The battlefields of France. Her journeys were often dangerous. Artillery echoed in the distance. Roads were scattered with debris. The sky glowed orange at night from distant fires. More than once she had to abandon a route because nearby fighting intensified. At times she drove in complete darkness, guided only by moonlight and her instinct for navigation. The sharp smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood clung to the air. Still, she pressed forward. Marie would step out of the Little Curie van, tie back her hair with steady hands, and immediately begin preparing the equipment. She arranged the X-ray tube, checked the electrical generator, calibrated exposure times, and set the fragile plates that would reveal what the naked eye could not. Her movements were efficient and calm. Her presence steadied those around her. Surgeons, overwhelmed by the sheer number of wounded, found relief when Marie walked into the room. She did not give dramatic speeches or draw attention to herself. She simply worked, quietly, precisely, relentlessly. Within minutes, she could locate a bullet lodged dangerously close to an artery. She could trace a fracture hidden beneath swollen flesh. She could offer surgeons clarity that meant the difference between life and death. The weight of responsibility. Marie never forgot that every plate she developed carried a human story. A young soldier who could barely speak from pain whispered "Merci" as she adjusted his arm. Another, barely older than her daughters, smiled weakly when she showed him the image of his own bones. Fascinated despite his fear, she understood that many of these men would not return home. Her task was not to save them all. She knew that was impossible, but to give each one the best chance she could. Sometimes late at night she sat beside the bed of a soldier who had no family near enough to comfort him. She spoke softly, sometimes in French, sometimes in halting English or Polish, offering warmth in a place filled with cold metal and antiseptic air. She rarely cried, but her silence carried the weight of everything she had witnessed. Training a new generation, Marie knew the war would demand more than she alone could provide. So she trained others, dozens of women, many with no background in science, who soon became skilled radiographers. They learned to handle the delicate glass plates, to understand the contrasts in images, to protect themselves from exposure as best as possible. Some of these women were only a few years older than Irene. They looked to Marie with admiration and trust, following her instructions with unwavering devotion. By 1917, mobile and stationary radiology units staffed by these women were operating across France. Together, they performed over 1 million X-ray examinations during the war. A scientist without a weapon, Marie did not carry a rifle. She never fired a shot, yet few contributions were as vital as hers. In the midst of destruction, she brought clarity. In the heart of war, she brought science. And in the quiet moments between battles, she brought something soldiers rarely found, a sense of humanity amid suffering. She often returned to Paris for brief periods, exhausted, her clothes smelling of antiseptic and smoke. Yet even then, she refused to rest. She coordinated supplies, raised funds for more equipment, and repaired damaged X-ray machines with her own hands. War was harsh, but Marie met its brutality with precision, compassion, an unwavering resolve. The legacy of service. When the war finally ended, the world praised generals, political leaders, and military strategists. But in hospitals across France, soldiers spoke another name with gratitude: Madame Curie. She did not seek medals or ceremonies. Yet the French government recognized her courage. Awarding her honors, she accepted quietly, almost reluctantly. What mattered most to her was not glory, but the lives saved, the men who walked again, the families reunited, the future generations her work would influence. Through war, Marie Curie had not abandoned science. She had revealed its deepest purpose: to heal where life is breaking, to illuminate where darkness prevails, to serve humanity in its most fragile moments. Her years on the battlefield left her permanently changed, physically, emotionally, spiritually. But they also reinforced something she had always believed: knowledge is not meant to rest, it is meant to act. And soon, the war behind her, she would build something that would carry her discoveries further than she ever imagined. The war ended, but its echoes lingered in Marie Curie's body long after the cannons fell silent. She returned to her laboratory with a mixture of relief and weariness, carrying inside her the invisible weight of everything she had witnessed. The Little Curies had saved countless lives, yet the work had come at a price she never paused long enough to measure. Now, in the quieter years after the armistice, the cost began to reveal itself. The slow unraveling of strength. Marie had always pushed herself beyond ordinary limits. During her student years in Paris, she had endured hunger and cold. During her research in the shed, she had lifted heavy cauldrons, inhaled toxic fumes, and handled radioactive materials with her bare hands. During the war, she had traveled endlessly, worked without rest, and stood for hours beside X-ray machines that hummed and glowed with unseen energy. None of this seemed dangerous at the time. Radiation was a new phenomenon. No one fully understood its harm. But years of exposure had been accumulating quietly, like shadows growing at the edges of her strength. She found herself increasingly tired, her vision weakened, her hands shook when she tried to perform delicate work. Some mornings she woke with a fatigue that felt older than her years. Yet she told no one. Marie Curie was not a woman who complained. She had spent a lifetime persevering through hardship, grief, and scrutiny. Illness, she assumed, was simply another obstacle to endure. The darkness within the light. Her laboratory notebooks, still preserved today, carry faint, permanent traces of radioactivity. So do her cookbooks, her letters, even her furniture. The glow that once symbolized hope and healing now shimmered with a quieter, more ominous meaning. Radium illuminated tumors in the medical wards, but it also illuminated the toll on those who worked with it. Marie noticed the burns on her fingertips more frequently now, the small lesions that healed slowly, the unexplained fevers, the dizziness that swept over her like a sudden tide. Doctors advised rest, but she continued. She had too much to do. The Radium Institute was thriving. Her students depended on her. Her daughters were growing into brilliant young women. The scientific world still sought her guidance, and deep within her, the same curiosity that once led her to name radioactivity continued to urge her forward. She believed in the power of knowledge, even when knowledge demanded more of her than she could comfortably give. The quiet courage of carrying on. Marie Curie never viewed herself as a martyr. She did not see sacrifice as heroic, only necessary. Each morning she tied back her hair, put on the same worn laboratory clothes, and walked through the halls of the Radium Institute bathed in soft sunlight. Students watched her with admiration as she moved from room to room, her posture delicate but her mind sharp. Even as her eyesight faded, she traced equations with unwavering certainty. Even as her body weakened, her voice retained its quiet authority. Even as pain settled into her bones, she continued to teach, to mentor, to inspire. She rarely spoke of her health, but those close to her saw the change. The way she paused more often, the way her steps slowed as she crossed the courtyard, the way she leaned subtly against a table when fatigue overtook her. Still, she greeted each student with warmth. Still, she read their papers late into the night. Still, she guided experiments with a steadiness that belied her failing strength. A life measured in meaning, not years. Marie once wrote that she had no desire for riches or comforts, only the chance to work in peace. She gave her discoveries to humanity freely, never patenting radium, never seeking wealth from its commercial use. Everything she had, she invested in her institute, her students, and the progress of science. And though the world admired her brilliance, few understood the depth of her selflessness. The hidden cost of discovery was not simply physical. It lived in her solitude, in the loss of Pierre, in the exhausting battle against prejudice, in the relentless weight of expectation. But she bore these burdens with quiet grace. For Marie Curie, the measure of a life was not how long one lived, but how deeply one illuminated the world. Her own light, though dimming physically, continued to burn in her scientific legacy, in her daughter's achievements, and in every hospital where radium treatment eased suffering. The cost was great, but the impact was immeasurable. And though she would never fully acknowledge the toll, the world would one day look back with awe at the woman who gave so much of herself so that others might live. As the years unfolded, Marie Curie's life settled into a quieter rhythm, not peaceful exactly, but steady, purposeful, illuminated by the work she had set in motion. The world around her was changing rapidly. New technologies, new nations, new scientific frontiers emerged from the ashes of war. Yet through all this movement, one truth remained constant. Marie Curie had changed the course of science forever. Her discoveries did not fade with time. They expanded, multiplied, inspired. The Radium Institute, a living monument. The Radium Institute in Paris, her creation, her sanctuary, her gift to the future, soon became one of the world's leading centers for both medical treatment and scientific research. Its halls echoed with the footsteps of students from distant countries, drawn to study under the woman whose name had become synonymous with courage, precision, and vision. In the laboratories, young physicists refined her theories. In the medical wing, doctors treated cancers with techniques she had pioneered. In the lecture rooms, her words took root in minds eager to follow her path. Marie never walked these halls with arrogance. She moved lightly, almost shyly, nodding to researchers as they passed, answering questions with soft explanations, offering guidance with gentle clarity. Her presence carried a kind of stillness, a reminder that greatness could coexist with humility. Her daughters, inheriting the flame. Marie's daughters grew into the light she had ignited. Irene, brilliant from childhood, became a physicist in her own right. She inherited Marie's sharp mind, Pierre's quiet thoughtfulness, and the shared passion that once united her parents. Working in the Radium Institute alongside her husband, Frédéric Joliot, she extended her mother's discoveries into new realms of nuclear science. In 1935, long after Marie's passing, Irene would receive her own Nobel Prize, a testament not only to her genius but to the legacy her mother had poured into her with love and discipline. Eve, the younger daughter, carried a different flame. Where Irene pursued science, Eve pursued music, writing, diplomacy. She became a celebrated author and humanitarian, traveling the world to support causes of peace. Marie supported them both wholeheartedly. She believed that the world needed many forms of brilliance, that science was only one of the ways a person could illuminate humanity. A quiet influence felt around the world. As knowledge of radioactivity deepened, scientists everywhere built upon the foundation Marie had laid. Her work helped open the door to modern cancer radiotherapy, nuclear physics, new methods of imaging, advances in chemistry, and the birth of atomic science. Hospitals across continents now used radiation as a tool for healing, the very vision Marie had once dreamed of while stirring heavy pots of pitchblende in a cold Parisian shed. Her discoveries reached far beyond the laboratory. They entered the lives of ordinary people, patients hoping for recovery, doctors striving for better methods, families clinging to second chances. A reputation restored, the scandal that once threatened to overshadow her achievements faded into the shadows of history. Scientists came to recognize her resilience, her integrity, her unwavering pursuit of truth. Honors accumulated quietly around her, medals, memberships, honorary degrees, but she accepted each with the same modesty. She never let glory take space in her heart. There she held only curiosity, memory, and duty. The light she left behind. Marie Curie once wrote, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood." These words became the guiding philosophy of generations of scientists who followed her. In classrooms and research centers, her story inspired young minds, especially young women who saw in her not just a scientist, but a pathfinder, a door opener, a possibility. She had not lived her life seeking to be extraordinary. She simply refused to let obedience, prejudice, or grief place boundaries around her mind. And so, without intending to, she became one of the most extraordinary figures in human history. Her legacy was not written in statues or ceremonies. It was written in light, the light of fluorescent radium in darkened rooms, the light of X-rays revealing hidden fractures, the light of knowledge passed from teacher to student, the light of hope in hospital corridors, the light of courage carried within the human spirit. Even as her strength waned, that light continued to shine. In the institute she built, in the lives she touched, and in the discoveries she sparked. Marie Curie's legacy was not a single achievement, but a constellation of them, glowing steadily across decades, illuminating a path for all who sought truth in the world's deepest mysteries. And though she could not see the full future shaped by her work, she sensed its direction toward healing, toward understanding, toward a brighter world. Long after Marie Curie first isolated radium in her drafty makeshift laboratory, the element continued to reshape the world in ways she could scarcely have imagined. What began as a faint, mysterious glow in a darkened room became one of the most powerful medical tools of the 20th century, a tool that changed how doctors understood disease, how patients faced illness, and how science envisioned the future of healing. Radium was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It was a force that forever transformed medicine. A new understanding of the invisible. Before radium, disease was often understood through symptoms alone. Doctors relied on what they could see, touch, or hear. Tumors growing deep inside the body remained hidden until they became advanced, often untreatable. But radioactivity, the quiet, steady emission of energy from radium's core, offered a new way of understanding what the eyes could not see. Physicians soon realized that radium's rays could disrupt cells from within. Healthy cells were affected, yes, but cancer cells, which grew faster and with less control, were even more vulnerable. This observation opened a new field, radiotherapy, the use of radiation to treat disease. Marie Curie did not invent radiotherapy on her own, but without her discovery, without her tireless isolation of radium, without her generosity in sharing her research freely with the world, the field could not have begun. Her work offered medicine a completely new weapon against one of humanity's oldest and most feared adversaries, cancer. The first treatments. Early radium therapy was rudimentary compared to modern methods, yet even those first attempts brought hope where there had been none. Doctors placed tiny sealed tubes of radium directly against tumors, on the skin, in the mouth, in the uterus, deep inside tissues where surgery could not reach. The results were sometimes astonishing. Tumors shrank, pain eased, lives lengthened. Newspaper articles described radium as miraculous, though Marie always cautioned restraint. She understood that science required patience, precision, and constant refinement. Yet she could not deny the profound shift beginning to take shape. For the first time in history, cancer was not always a sentence. It was a challenge, a foundation for modern oncology. As techniques improved, radium became a foundational tool in the early development of oncology. Hospitals around the world built radiation therapy departments. Doctors collaborated with physicists to design safer, more effective methods. Radium needles and seeds implanted directly into tumors, fractionated treatment schedules that balanced damage and recovery, protective shielding to limit exposure to healthy tissue. Every advancement carried echoes of Marie's early work, her measurements, her theories, her warnings about careful handling. The medical field grew rapidly, combining chemistry, physics, engineering, and clinical practice. And at its core stood the woman who had followed faint signals from a mineral until they revealed a new force of nature. Beyond the cure, understanding life itself. Radium's influence extended beyond treatment. Its study led scientists to explore how cells grow, divide, and repair themselves. It pushed biologists to examine DNA long before its structure was revealed. It compelled doctors to rethink their understanding of illness at the molecular level. In this way, radium helped medicine move from the surface of the body to its deepest architecture. Marie did not live to see many of these advancements, yet every discovery traced its roots back to the day she wrote a simple word in her notebook: radioactivity, a gift given freely. Perhaps the most remarkable part of radium's legacy is that Marie Curie refused to patent her methods. She believed that knowledge must belong to the world, especially when it held the potential to heal. As a result, hospitals across continents were free to use radium in patient care without restriction. Researchers could experiment, improve techniques, and share their findings openly. The acceleration of medical progress in the early 20th century owes much to her refusal to turn discovery into profit. She sacrificed wealth, comfort, and ultimately her own health. But in doing so, she made healing accessible to countless people who would never know her name. The light that never dimmed today. Radium is used less frequently, replaced by more precise and safer radiation technologies. But its legacy endures. It laid the foundation for modern radiotherapy, CT imaging, nuclear medicine, targeted radionuclide therapy, cancer research as we know it. Marie Curie's discovery illuminated more than tumors. It illuminated pathways that continue to save millions of lives each year. Her light did not fade with time. It evolved, expanded, and adapted. It became part of the very structure of modern medicine. And though Marie herself grew weaker with each passing year, her contribution to healing only grew stronger. Her life had been difficult, often painful, often lonely. Yet in her hands, the hidden energy of the atom became a source of hope, comfort, and possibility. A legacy not of wealth, but of light. In the later years of her life, Marie Curie moved with a slow but steady grace, not the youthful energy that once carried her through long days in the shed, or the fierce determination that drove her across battlefields during the war. This was a different kind of strength, quiet, patient, enduring. Her hair, once dark, had turned completely silver. Her footsteps were softer. Her voice, though still calm and sure, carried the faint rasp of fatigue. But her eyes, the deep, thoughtful eyes that had once studied faint flickers of radioactivity in the shadows, remained bright. Curiosity never dimmed in her. A life surrounded by purpose. The Radium Institute was the heart of Marie's final chapter. Each morning she walked its familiar corridors, greeting students and researchers with a kind nod. Though her body weakened, her mind remained sharp, and she continued to guide experiments, refine theories, and teach with a gentleness that made even the most complex ideas feel accessible. She no longer performed heavy laboratory work. Her hands trembled too much, and her doctors insisted on caution, but she still reviewed research notes late into the evenings, pencil in hand, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. Around her, a new generation of scientists flourished. Some came from distant continents, drawn by her reputation. Others were young women who felt, perhaps for the first time, that the world might make space for them in the halls of science. Marie inspired them not with grandeur, but with humility. Time with her daughters. Her daughters, Irene and Eve, remained the brightest joys of her private life. Irene, now a brilliant scientist and mother herself, often discussed research with her. Their conversations felt like an echo of the ones Marie once shared with Pierre, full of discovery, questions, and the quiet thrill of understanding nature more deeply. Eve brought music, laughter, and stories from her work abroad. She played the piano for her mother in the evenings, filling the apartment with warm, comforting notes that seemed to soften the fatigue Marie carried. Marie loved both daughters deeply, each reflecting a different part of her soul, the scientific fire and the artistic gentleness. A body worn by invisible light. Though she rarely admitted it aloud, Marie's health continued to deteriorate. Years of exposure to radiation, long before its dangers were understood, had weakened her bones, clouded her vision, and left her often breathless. She carried notebooks, clothing, even simple objects that were unknowingly infused with radioactivity. This invisible companion had walked beside her for decades, shaping her discoveries and slowly taking her strength in return. Yet Marie never expressed regret. She accepted the consequences of her work with the same calm that guided her through every hardship. To her, the pursuit of truth had been worth the cost. She believed that science, when used in the service of humanity, demanded both devotion and risk. The quiet retreat to San Selemos. In the spring of 1934, after months of worsening fatigue, Marie traveled to the San Selemos Sanatorium in the French Alps. The air was cool and clean, drifting through tall pine trees and quiet mountain slopes. It was a place meant for rest, for recovery, though Marie seemed to know, deep down, that her journey was nearing its end. Even there, she asked for scientific papers to read. Even there, she kept her notebooks beside her bed. Her curiosity stayed with her until the very last days. Doctors diagnosed her with aplastic anemia, a condition linked to long-term radiation exposure. But Marie faced the news with the same serenity she had shown all her life. She did not fear death. She feared only leaving her work unfinished. A peaceful farewell. On July 4, 1934, Marie Curie passed away quietly, surrounded by soft mountain light. She was 66 years old. There were no dramatic final words, no grand farewell, just a calm, gentle passing. The quiet extinguishing of a body that had carried more brilliance than it was ever meant to contain. France mourned her. Scientists around the world mourned her. Her daughters mourned her most deeply. But even in grief, there was a sense of awe, a recognition that her life had been extraordinary, not because of fame or prizes, but because of her unwavering devotion to truth, her compassion for others, and her courage to step into the unknown. A legacy that outlived the body. Marie Curie was laid to rest beside Pierre in Sceaux, but her legacy did not remain in stone or soil. It lived in every hospital that used radiation to ease suffering, in every scientist who pushed into uncharted territory, in every young woman who dared to imagine a place for herself in science, in every life saved by techniques that began with a faint glow in a Parisian shed. In 1995, her remains were moved to the Pantheon, the highest honor in France, making her the first woman buried there for her own achievements. But Marie Curie's true monument was not a tomb. It was the light she brought into the world, a light that illuminated the structure of matter, the path of healing, and the possibilities of human determination. Her life ended quietly, but her impact continues, vast and radiant. A luminous life, gently extinguished, a luminous legacy shining still,